Hi guys, I'm Amy and welcome to my podcast Spill the Teeth, where I spill the tea on all things dentistry and a bunch of other fun things. Welcome to episode 13. So guys, I know it's been a really long time. I think my last episode was either back in June or July, back in the summer semester. So I'm not going to bore you with all the details of D3 summer semester. It was really just like intro to clinic. I treated some patients, got canceled on other patients, and was in a lot of rotations, and then I had a 3-week break, and now I'm in my first week of the fall semester. For those of you watching, if you see anything flying across the screen, I am battling right now fruit flies, and it's giving me major PTSD from my genetics lab when I worked with fruit flies. But yeah, I am trying to get rid of them. They seem to sprung up from somewhere, and I'm currently fighting a battle. So, as you guys know, I always start out with talking about what I did this past week. So, this was the first week back from a 3-week summer break. Not long enough, but very much needed, and now I'm back. So, we started out strong with a lot of classes. I have classes from 8 to 9 in the morning, and then usually 1 to 2 in the afternoons. So these classes this semester consist of classes like OMFS 2, so Oral Maxillofacial Surgery 2, Applied Pharmacology, Advanced Oral Med, Fixed 3, so Fixed Prosthodontics 3, Evidence-Based Dentistry, and I'm probably forgetting some, but actually it's not too bad compared to my D2 spring semester, or really any class schedule from my first 2 years of dentistry. I would say it's a manageable class load. Of course, I haven't gotten to the midst of the semester, so the middle of the semester, I'm sure I'll be eating my words then, but for now, it's a manageable load, and yeah. My time blocks from 9 to 12, and then 2 to 5 are being in clinic. So this first week, I was in a couple rotations. I was in oral surgery, I was in emergency med, and stuff like that. And then anytime that we're not in a rotation, we are free to schedule our own patients. So I had a patient from the summer who I was finishing a perio maintenance, so I got her in and I just finished her perio maintenance, which just consisted of me scaling her teeth and then brushing her teeth. And guys, I had to be very general when speaking about patients, obviously because of HIPAA, and I'm very conscious of things surrounding that and not saying anything or showing anything that is going to breach that privacy agreement that patients have with us as student dentists as we work in the clinic. So if I do talk with a patient, it's going to be in very vague terms and just general treatment wise, but obviously no patient identifiers, and obviously I can't use a phone in clinic, so I don't have any pictures to show you. And that is something to be concerned of, especially if you are someone who's on Instagram or whatnot as someone who's a medical or dental student or a PA student. Be especially aware of HIPAA when you're talking about things that you do in clinic or stuff when you're working with patients, because of course our patient privacy comes first. So other than the rotations and that one patient that I had gotten in, I assisted the rest of the week. So if we don't have rotations or we don't have our own patients, we are required to assist. Like, you can't just skip out on clinic and call it a day, call it an early day. You have to find something to do either in a rotation area or assisting. And there's always things to assist. I always try to assist my fellow classmates because an assistant is not always guaranteed to us, but if there's something that's high priority and the schedulers know that we are free, we'll get put with patients. And so I assisted a couple of students. I assisted this one student like 3 times or something crazy. And then I assisted one of my own classmates. And honestly, I don't mind assisting. I've actually become, not to toot my own horn, but I think I've become a pretty good assistant and is able to anticipate the things that my operator needs. And honestly, it also makes you a better clinician because you see things that you might not have seen already, and it helps you get prepared. So, like, things I haven't seen yet are having my own patients who need dentures or stuff like that, or extractions, but being an assistant for patients that do need dentures or in oral surgery needing extractions helps me become a better clinician by being able to see those before I get those patients myself. So that's really all I did in clinic this week. I'm trying to get my patients scheduled and get those lined up so I don't have as much empty spaces that I have to assist but can treat my own patients. But, just coming back, I need to call those patients and whatnot. So you guys know the section next, the hot and nots of the week. The not, because I believe in starting with the bad news first, was being the OS operator the first day coming back after break. And mind you, I've only been the assistant in OS, so oral surgery, and I hold instruments, do suction and whatever, but I've never been the OS operator, much less extracted a tooth. So I was very nervous about that, and also I have not done anything really dentistry related for 3 weeks. And so I was very panicked about that. The person who runs OS at first said that the D3s weren't expected to get any patients as the operators, except maybe post op appointments, because, of course, we're just coming back from a 3 week break and we don't really know what we're doing. But so I was going to just shadow another group of students, but then a D4 came back with an extraction case, and so because I was the assigned OS operator that day, I was the person in charge of that extraction. Really in charge, I put quotation marks, is a better term because I was more like a glorified assistant. Obviously, I don't know what I'm doing. So the D4 who came back with the extraction case helped me. She walked me through what instruments to use and kind of helped me with the process and guiding my hands. So I didn't end up pulling out the tooth. We actually had to call in the covering doctor who then extracted the tooth, but it was kind of cool to actually use the instruments instead of just watching someone else use them, and definitely has helped me because I was the OS assistant that same afternoon and later in the week. So it kind of helped me. Now, as an OS assistant, I'm thinking more about the tools and the things that we're using, and instead of just watching and using and holding suction. So even though it didn't go too badly. The patient lived, walked out, had the tooth extracted, and I'm the type of person who kind of needs to be thrown into something. If I think too much about something, I get really nervous about it. But the best thing for me to learn is just to be, drop kick me off the cliff and have me figure it out. The hot for this week was going back to school and getting back started with dentistry. Of course, I miss my family and all, but it is nice to be going back and doing the things that I need to learn to be able to become a dentist. And, again, like I said, I just need to be drop kicked off the cliff into stuff. So for me to be able to do that, I need to call my patients, get them scheduled, and just, go and do some stuff. But I am kind of nervous of doing things because the most I've done is doing perio maintenance. But perio maintenance is a lot different than drilling on people's teeth, which I have not done yet. So I'm kind of nervous about that, especially since I haven't done again, anything really dental related for the last 3 weeks, and I didn't do any operative over the summer as well. So I might have to go into lab and practice on a dentiform. Again, not the same as a real patient, but gets my hand muscles working and me thinking about things. And now we go to the back half of my podcast, which is where I talk about other things or dental adjacent things, and I don't have a lot to talk about this episode because, again, I've only been in school for a week now, after a 3 week break, so I thought, what better thing to talk about than what I did over summer break, because I know that's a burning thing that you guys have been dying to know about. Honestly, it just gives me an excuse to talk about what I did over the summer, so for the past 3 weeks is my summer break. So, here we go. So I took an early exodus from my summer semester because my sister had a wedding. I don't know if I talked about this in any of my summer episodes, which, granted, there weren't a lot of those. I think I only did like 2 episodes over the summer, but I had a second sister get married, and I went home a Thursday afternoon to be able to go to the wedding rehearsal and the rehearsal dinner, and then her wedding was on a Friday, so I was doing that, and that was always super fun. It's always nice to see my family, and obviously being at a wedding is also a lot of fun too. So that first week was doing that wedding and then just relaxing, and then the second week of my summer break, me and some of my family members went up to Michigan. We rent a cabin on a lake and we just swim, relax, eat a lot of junk food, and just, chill out and go on day adventures. And that's always super nice because I don't have a lot of responsibilities to do during that time. Not that I have a lot during my summer break, but I can sleep in, I can read books all day and whatever, go swimming, and then have good food. So after a relaxing week in Michigan, we got home, and then I had one more week just filled with relaxing and whatnot. One of the best things about being on summer break is that I can read all the books that I want, and I ended up reading, I think, like 15. I don't know. I've talked about this a lot, but I love reading, and I don't do a lot of it during the school year. I hope to do a little bit more of it since it's D3, and I'm not doing a lot of things in lab, like preclinic, because everything I'm doing in lab has to do with patients. But D1 and D2, I was doing a lot of lab classes. But this time around, I don't have any lab classes. The only stuff I do in lab would be for patient work. So I read 15 books, and I'll tell you the ones in case any of you are interested in reading and are looking for some good book recommendations. So I did read a series of books. I did not know it was a series until I got to the end of the first one, and then I had to read the last two in the series, the last 2 days I was at home. So that was the I Kill Killers series, and the first one is called I Kill Killers, second one is We Kill Killers, and the third one is Final Kill. I know, just a great, wholesome, all-around book. And it's about a pianist who is a serial killer of serial killers and how she teams up with somebody in the FBI and hunts down serial killers. I would rate overall the series a 4 out of 5, and I would only rate it a 4 out of 5 because there were like some not safe for work scenes in it that I don't think really enhance the story in any way, and I kind of just like skipped over them. But if you're looking for a good psychological thriller, kind of music related because she's a pianist, that's a good book series. And that is by S.T. Ashman. Another one I read is Word Hunter, and this is actually something I found while browsing the bookstore at a sidewalk sale. And of course, I'm too cheap to buy a book, so I just take a picture of it and then find it at the library and read it for free. So it was Word Hunter by Stella Sands, and it's about a linguist who helps the police solve a crime based on how the criminal words his messages and whatnot. It's actually pretty cool, and that was a good book. I'd rate it 5 out of 5. Another book that I read is actually part 2 of a series that I had first read the first book way back, I think early this year, because I actually got it from my school's blind date with a book thing. But the second one was Holmes is Missing by James Patterson and Brian Sitz, and that was a good book too. I would rate it a 5 out of 5. Another book that I read was by Frida McFadden called The Perfect Son. I would also rate that a 5 out of 5. It's very twisty. She writes very good twists. So that was a good book too. Another book that I read was The Underground Library by Jennifer Ryan. That's more of a historical fiction. I'd rate that a 5 out of 5 too. Very good. Of course, I need to read a Riley Sager. My tradition is that I read a Riley Sager every time I go on vacation in Michigan because I first started reading his books while in Michigan. So the most recent Riley Sager book was With a Vengeance, and it's a lot different than his usual books because the ones that I've read are psychological thriller, I would say, and this was more like a murder type mystery, less psychological thriller, but it was a very good murder mystery. You're guessing at who's murdered who and whatnot. And so I thought it was really good, 5 out of 5. Another book that I read was A Man Made of Smoke by Alex North, and I've actually been waiting for this book for a very long time. I don't remember when it first came out, but I think I was actually the one that requested my library to get it. The first one I read of his books, I read on my vacation too in Michigan. I think that was called The Whisper Man or something, or it was one of the books that I started reading at night, and I had to put it down because I got so scared reading it at night. And so his book, The Man Made of Smoke, was very good too. Less scary, I would say, more of like a murder mystery, but I would still rate it a 5 out of 5. And I love Alex North's books. I think he wrote 2 other ones, and I can't remember them off the top of my head because I read them a while ago, but his books are always very good, so he's always someone who I keep a tab on whose books are coming out. I then read 3 books by Richard Paul Evans. I don't know if I've ever talked about him, but he wrote one of my favorite romance stories, and I don't really read romance. He wrote one of my favorite romance stories of Mistletoe Promise, and I read his kind of autobiography called Sharing Too Much, Musings from an Unlikely Life, and that was good. And then I read 2 of his fiction books, Christmas in Bethel and The Christmas Promise, and honestly, I had forgotten that he still wrote books. Like, I only knew the Mistletoe Promise and other stuff that I read a long time ago, but when I was trying to. So, before I go on summer break, I go on Goodreads and whatnot and look at new books. And then I rent them from my library so they're ready for me when I go home for summer break, and then I can read them all at once. And so I kind of forgot that he wrote books until I looked him up again and I saw these two new ones. And, he's the king of Christmas, self proclaimed king of Christmas. So he writes a lot of Christmas themed stuff. And so Christmas in Bethel was okay. I do have to say, if you've read Richard Paul Evans books, especially the Mistletoe kind of trilogy, that if you've read those books, you kind of know his formula of writing books. So they're all kind of similar. So Christmas in Bethel was very much his formulaic romance writing for Christmas, I would say. And, no hate to him because it works. The Christmas Promise, though, was like one of the first books of his that I absolutely hated, and no one tell this to him if you know him, but I just did not like it. Spoiler alert. It's about an identical twin sister thing, but one of them dies, and then the guy who had married the twin sister that died comes back into the other twin sister's life, and they fall in love and stuff. And, kudos to people who are into that stuff, but I was not into it. And so I was like, oh, come on, you go for the identical twin sister. So I was like, ugh, gross. So that was the only one that I've read over the summer break that I would actually rate a 0 to 5. I would not read it again. And I actually don't read a lot of books like again and again. His book, The Mistletoe Promise, I read every single year. Love that book. But The Christmas Promise is a 0 to 5 for me. Would not read it again. And Christmas in Bethel, though, that was okay. 4 to 5, just because I know his formula now for writing books, and it's kind of similar to his other books. Another romance that I read is Me Before You by Jojo Moyes. I'm probably destroying her last name, but I had seen the movie of it floating around Amazon Prime, and I wanted to watch it, but when I found out it was a book, I'm like, I have to read the book first. So I read the book. I thought it was sad, obviously, for the ending. I'm not going to spoil it for people who don't know. But other than that, I think it was a really good book. I did find out that she wrote two other books kind of as a sequel to it, and I've read the summaries, and I'm just not interested in reading the next two books, so I'm just leaving it at the first book. And if you have read the two other books in the series and want to let me know what happens, you can. I don't mind the spoilers, but I would personally not read the rest of the book series. Another book that I read is called Daughter of the Moon Goddess, and I don't know the authoress off the top of my head, but honestly, I had just read her book because I was bored and didn't have any other books to read, and I had actually gotten these books out for my sister, who's very into like old Asian mythological type stuff. So I got her those books because I'm not into fantasy. I usually don't read fantasy, but I had no books at that point from the library because I had read all my other books, and I was waiting for other books to come in, so I ended up reading that, and it was okay. I would rate it a 5 out of 5. My sister liked it too. My sister plans on reading the rest of the series. But again, that's not a genre I would pick up myself. I was just really bored. The last book that I read was Head Cases by John McMahon, and I think I talked about this in one of my past episodes, that this was a book that I wanted to read, but I couldn't get it out at the library at that time. So I made sure to get that at the library as I was going on to summer break, so then it would be able to pick up. And honestly, that was my favorite book out of all the books that I read over break. I would rate it a 5 out of 5. I found out too that there's going to be a second book being written that comes out next year, so I'm really excited for that. If you guys have any book recommendations for me, feel free to, DM me, drop them in the comment or something, because I'm always looking for stuff to read. I'm probably not going to get to it this semester, but maybe if I decide to read an online book, I can. And I don't know if I've talked about this, but I don't like reading books online. I have a Kindle, so I could do it if I wanted to. There's something about a physical book that I just like. And you do a cheap bookmark index card, you plop it in. And if I don't have an index card, which I didn't over the summer break, I just used this receipt that was printed with my books to say that I had checked it out, and I just would put it in the book, and it would, as a cheap bookmark. And then I don't count these, but I did read 2 Nancy Drew books. I don't count them only because I've read Nancy Drew books over and over again, another book series and books that I can read over and over again, but I don't count those because I've already read them. So officially I read 15, but I did read 2 Nancy Drew books. I did have a did not finish book. It was called The Wedding People. It was kind of like a romance, funny type book, but I just got into the middle of it, and just the way the plot was going, I'm like, I don't care for this book. So I did not finish it. And that, I think, leaves about 2 or 3 books in my whole entire life that I have not finished. Anyway, I'm rambling now. So it's probably a good idea to end the podcast. So thank you, wherever you are, whoever you are, for listening and or watching this podcast. I really appreciate you. I hope to, keep up with this podcast during the semester and not, drop off the face of the earth. Because I'm sure there will be interesting things to talk about what I'm doing in clinic, and then other things other than dentistry that I can talk about too. If you have any questions that you would like me to answer, either dentistry related or not dentistry related at all, just DM me or send me a carrier pigeon. Either way works. I will answer them. It's been so long since I did my podcast, I can't remember my outro. But anyway, I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next episode.